Our book is framed around an analogy of an octopus, and a lot of it derives from the octopus's very weird anatomy and biology.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name's Caspar, I'm your host, and with me is, as always, my friend and co-host, Russell. Russell, how are you, and are you at home?
I'm at home. Hi, Caspar. Yeah, and it's Friday, which is good, but I have a bit of a task. I'm a bit stressed out because my son's birthday is tomorrow, and that means we're gonna have to really tidy up the whole flat before the family comes to visit. And as you know, we have a big family, but now it's gonna be awesome to get the family together because we're coming up to Christmas. There's a lot going on, and it's great if we do manage to schedule some time where a lot of people get together. Because it looks like, with customers now, everybody's saying, yeah, see you next year. And you go, what, next year? And you go, oh, it's only a couple of weeks left. And
goes
so
really
everybody's
quick.
starting to, wave this, the goodbye to this year. But on that point, actually, I also just something I wanted to mention to you. I'm a regular listener of a podcast. I don't always read newspapers in the morning, just listen to a podcast while I'm getting some breakfast ready. And I stumbled across this comment that they were looking at and discussing the Salesforce report that's come out on their revenues, and that the actual revenues actually, or the stock value went down with AI because everybody was saying, is CRM going to be relevant in the time age of AI? But something I've always seen with Salesforce is that they really adopted fast to the AI train. So they brought out no podcasts. They've started building in little functions on a lot of layers. Whereas, say, for example, when we talked about SAP, they're still working on the big solution. With Joule, they've showcased a lot, but it's not really functional. And now I heard that the revenues, AI-based revenues of Salesforce are really kicking off. So they really seemed to have adopted to this new technology. And that's something I think is really fascinating. And I think that's a cool topic because we have a guest today. And
we do
dig into this, so how can you adopt quick to new technologies and be innovative and stuff like that. I think we have just the right guest on our panel today. So let's switch over and get our guest introduced and
let's
get
do that.
Talking.
Good. So indeed, Russell, again, we have a very interesting guest today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Wunker to the show. Steve, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on. And
welcome.
We can talk about that topic for sure.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason I think Russell brought it up. So Steve, in full, Steve Wunker, you're the managing director of New Markets Advisors, New Markets Solutions. Sorry, advisors, right?
Yes,
advisors. Yeah,
hopefully leading
that up somewhere,
Caspar. Otherwise, what's the point? That's right.
I totally agree with that. So would you be so kind to introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners? Who are you? What's your life story? And how did you typically get in contact with the wonderful world of business processes that for sure play a part in your day-to-day work as well?
Sure thing. So I started out my business career after business school at Bain & Company, doing classic management consulting things, as one does, as one did back in the 90s. I went from Bain into tech. I actually led one of the world's first smartphone development projects for a British company, Scion, that had invented the personal digital assistant and was combining a PDA with a phone to make what we called a smartphone. That was a very novel term back in the day. And we did this on a white label basis for both Ericsson and Motorola. I was utterly unqualified for this job from a technical perspective, but I had a fascination with new markets and how to create new markets. Eventually, we did create a new market. I learned there that a lot of that you learn in classic management consulting at a place like Bain don't always apply in a highly dynamic sort of nascent area like smartphones. I went from smartphones into entrepreneurial ventures as a corporate venture and as an entrepreneur myself, started some of the first mobile marketing, mobile commerce companies. And then I never thought I would go back into consulting again. I really like starting things. But we'd sold the mobile commerce company, and I went back to Boston and linked up with Clayton Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard Business School, who had coined the term disruptive innovation and was responsible for popularizing theories like jobs to be done. Clay had written these books, which sold really well, like The Innovator's Dilemma. It sold 2 million copies. People would read this and they'd say, that's awesome. Now, what do I actually do? How do I actually bring this to life in my organization? And so Clay gathered a handful of us together that had come from top consulting firms and wanted to create sort of a best of breed approach for consulting, but applied to situations of disruptive innovation. So I worked together with him for about 6 years in building up his firm. And then I spun out New Markets Advisors at the end of 2009 to do similar things, albeit with a different sort of business model. So we've been operating now for close to 16 years, and we are about 15 people based in Boston. I'm actually in our San Juan, Puerto Rico office today, and we're based in Lisbon too. So we advise on new markets. Certainly, innovation processes are a big part of what we do. So that's my link into innovation process and business process. And then we've worked with AI since 2012. We've done dozens of projects with AI. So I've certainly have a lot of experience there, and we'll get into that as we discuss further.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely wonderful.
And that's exactly where I thought this is a really nice angle, because Caspar and I, coming from let's say the classical process management methodology, and also working in some large enterprises, a lot of the time it's all around standardization. So the whole leverage there is the more standardized and efficient you have a process running, and you try to keep it stable as everybody's happy. Yeah, the IT system doesn't have to be changed every now and then. And the throughput time, the people are kind of like adapted to the processes, they're efficient. But the more and more you notice, it doesn't work like that. Or it does work for the supply chain, for example. Once you have the product and you push it through the pipeline, but as soon as you go in directions of product development, as soon as you go into directions of sales, like CRM systems, you see that the classical linear process and the methodology on how to streamline and the whole thinking about that is somehow in contrary to the actual, maybe the requirements of being disruptive and innovative. So this is something where I think when you say new market advisors, in how far are you more engaged with startups that are really, like where you have like a classical spin-off of a big company maybe, or something completely freshly induced with money to enter a new market? Or in how far do you also advise big customers on bringing in disruptive thinking? And where do you see the differences in these two, let's say, approaches, or these two, like say, customer segments?
Excellent question, Russell. So we certainly work with venture-backed startups, but most of our business is with large enterprises. I think at last count, we worked with 32 of the Fortune 500. Now, I think that large enterprises can do a lot in an agile manner, but it requires learning different behaviors, having different processes. That doesn't mean there's no process, but it means there are distinct processes for different purposes. Startups have a different situation. Oftentimes, they don't have a process, or they have a formal process that nobody follows. And so you have to uncover what's the actual process, because there always is a process, even if it's not written down, and then decide if that is fit for purpose. But their real problem, actually, for a startup, I find, is that it is a surplus of ideas. There are too many ideas, and they need to determine where to focus and how they're going to execute on the focus. Large enterprises, that's not always the issue.
So interestingly, I mean, I heard an entrepreneur said once, any business up to 100 million in revenue, you can manage from the kitchen table. If it goes beyond that, you need structure. And structure typically comes with processes indeed. And I like your comment very much, Steve, on even if you don't have a process written down, there still is a process, because ultimately anything that you do always ends up in the form of a process. It's just either documented or not documented. Where would you say, if you look at the lifespan of let's say a new venture that you're maybe that you're supporting, at what point would you say that we now need to start thinking about structure more than just doing what we think is right?
I think it's actually fairly early. Once you hit about 50 employees, I think you start needing that, because you just don't have the visibility into what everybody's work is. to make decisions as a senior exec. And look, I've done that. I've grown 2 companies from a handful of people to about 70. And by the time you hit 70, there's complexity and there's politics and all this other stuff. As much as you try to keep it out of there, it is just the laws of physics in an organization will make that happen. So it is pretty early. Now, you don't need to get incredibly complicated with process. When I worked with Motorola on the smartphone, they had an 18-gate stage gate process. 18.
Yep.
And they were proud of that. I was not so proud of that. That was the opposite of agility, and we needed agility.
Yeah.
So you need fitness for purpose, but there is still a value to having process.
Yeah. I usually go by the rule of thumb. If I can't read a process when it's printed on an A4 or letter format in US, it's too big. And you need to trim it down or you need to chop it up. I completely in line with you there, Steve. Then a follow-on question. I mean, we are living in an age of AI, of at least emerging AI. I'm still a bit on the fence whether it's mature yet or not. But how does it influence your line of business?
So let's talk about the book a little bit then.
Yes.
So I have a book that came out a couple of months ago called AI and the Octopus Organization.
Well, there you go.
This
That's
book
a
is
nice
done very
cover.
well. This is my 5th book, and it is done by far the best of all the books. The book is not so much a technology book as an organization and management book. The subject of the book is how does AI change the nature of organizations and management? And how must we change the nature of those entities in order to get the most out of AI? So that is the focus in the book. Now, sure, in other work, we work on AI strategy and AI products, but it's that question, that management and organizational question that I don't think has been asked remotely enough. And it certainly pertains to the nature of processes as well. So this is a lot of what we're doing, looking at how not just do you paste AI onto your existing processes, your existing workflows, but how do you rethink fundamentally what's going on in the organization now that you have AI as an enabler?
Yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, it's an enabler, right? I sometimes have the feeling that it leads more than it should. I mean, it leads conversations very often from not an enabler position, but much more as a guiding principle. I personally think that might be the wrong way of looking at it, but I'm very keen to learn your perspective on that as well. So you mentioned enabler. So can I then conclude from that you basically think that you run a business and AI can help you get better at that, rather than saying, how do we need to change to make sure that we do AI better? Because those, I think, are 2 different perspectives.
That's right. Look, as with anything else, AI is a tool to accomplish business objectives. However, it is a fundamentally revolutionary tool, and you would really benefit from rethinking what those business objectives are, because now you have AI as an enabler. Let me give you a concrete example. HelloFresh is the world's largest meal kit delivery company based in Germany, 14 years of history. It has typically given its customers a set of choices, a pretty big set. They called it the binder of choices to choose the next month's meals from. Now, it had a boom during the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, things sort of subsided a little bit. And they realized that they needed to do something to retain the loyalty of their customers. So they fundamentally rethought what they could do because of AI. So now you don't necessarily get the binder, you get a handful of choices customized for you based on how you've substituted things in the past, how you've rated meals. So it knows that Caspar substitutes chicken for pork and Russell likes things a little bit spicy, and it can give you very tailored suggestions based upon this 14 years of data that it has that its competitors don't. That's a competitive moat. So that fundamentally rechanges the value proposition for Fresh. However, and this gets to the point of process, it also fundamentally changes the processes in the organization. It used to be that in the kitchens they had, big industrial kitchens, you would have production runs of various meals. But now you might have 2,000 variations of a meal going through there in a week. And there's just no way that you're going to plan out the production runs. AI has to do that. The humans can't do that anymore. And then for sourcing as well of ingredients, that gets far more complicated too. So this business would have been impossible to execute without AI. Because of AI, HelloFresh could fundamentally rethink who it was, how it could be more valuable and more competitively differentiated.
Yeah.
But to a certain extent, then the for the management is questioning everything around there, starting with their business model and what the constraints of their business model were in the past, to question that and actually then see if that a door opens up that they didn't even realize the door was there before, because it was like something that had been there for 100 years, like a constraint where you say, if you do a product, that's the way you have to do it. You need a recipe, and you need a lead time of 2 days. And that's why, for this reason, they had certain heuristics and rules. So it is a mindset thing. But do you actually, so is this like the core of your consulting, that you help them facilitate the identifying the doors that can be pushed open? Is that a lot also what the book is about, to give a framework of tools to initiate this fresh thinking and questioning actually what you're doing, and then having a structured way of identifying the best potential for the future? What is your take on that from a book and consulting side?
Russell, you tempt me to show off several of my books.
Feel free.
We start with the customer. We believe you must start with the customer. Clay Christensen originated some thinking called Jobs to be Done. This is my second book, Jobs to be Done. And it's about how do you deploy this methodology, basically trying to understand what are people trying to get done in their lives. Not what are they buying today, not what do they say they want, but what are they fundamentally trying to get done? And what are all the potential vectors of innovation you have around accomplishing that? And then so that's a very expansive way of looking at the customer. And then another book I have is called Cost Ovation. This is about using those same tools of innovation on the cost side of your business, which seldom gets done, by the way. But there's no reason why innovation is just a revenue thing. It can be a cost thing as well. So you can then rethink that whole process. Sometimes, first book, Capturing New Markets. This is my firstborn, and so I'm still very loyal to it.
Of course. Of course.
If you can do that, if you can find a new market, it's not always possible. If you can do that, that is tremendously valuable. So yes, as a consultant, we look throughout and we try to be agnostic about where the biggest opportunity is, but we always start with the customer. And then we look back at the cost structure of the business, how things actually get produced, whether it's a product or service, and how can you think innovatively about that? Now, AI is a fundamental enabler in that. But, to your earlier question, how we started off on this chain, we don't start out saying, okay, we have a hammer, let's go look for nails. We start with a business problem or a set of business problems, and we look at all the tools that might be applicable.
Yeah, because a lot of it, what I realize is that a lot of customers, they start the discussion because AI is apparently there, but then they identify, but we don't even have a lot of the problems they then discuss. They can be solved with, if they had done their homework, let's say on an organizational process or IT, a normal digital IT like a level, they could solve their problems as well. So it's astonishing how AI is just another hammer. And when you're looking for nails, you all of a sudden find screws and realize, I've got a screwdriver I haven't been using for a long time. And so I say, hey, wait a minute, let's get that fixed as well. And so it's initiating a thinking and a process that is making people also have a sense of urgency to change and move forward, and not just take placently everything as it is. And on that journey, they identify a lot of potential that can be solved with whatever means, and AI. Yeah. So, that's right. And that's what I think is quite interesting about the disruption that is being triggered now. It's covering up a lot of other deficits in the companies that are hopefully being tackled.
That's right. And look, generative AI is not the only kind of AI to solve things with. We've had algorithmic AI for decades. We've had decent image recognition capabilities for over a decade. So, and look, AI will keep on changing. So if we start creating our solutions based on today's AI, well, in 2 years, that's going to be out of date. That's why we need to start with the business problem. And then you can design the solution, maybe with some AI capabilities, but also have a modular approach, so that as AI advances, you're not wed to prior models of the way things are done, you can upgrade those capabilities.
And that's an interesting point. Caspar, let me just jump in there.
Yeah, sure.
Because
go ahead.
What I also see is that a lot of these big companies with big investments on IT infrastructure, they're a tanker and then they get a tanker on top, and you notice that the platforms that they are digging into, that they don't really offer the flexibility for change. Extreme case, SAP, before you did a Z transaction, it was there 30 years later. Yeah, or because if somebody said, I don't touch it, I don't understand the code, somehow it works, and let's just keep it at its answer. And what you do need now is also the understanding that you need to have something up and running fast, but the way you set up, the decisions you take, they can be obsolete in half a year because the technology is moving forward so fast. And if you see there's certain capabilities are provided much faster and better from other providers, you have to cater for that in your whole infrastructure and your thinking. That is a big challenge. So not just on the operational business side of how you get your core business done, but the whole underlaying thinking around the services, IT services, even human resource services, everything is in flux. And I think that's what companies really struggle with. Do you, from this cultural shift perspective, are your books like a help there? Is that something that you dig into to say, how can you prepare your organization, your people to cope with this? Because ultimately, a lot of people I see in business, they're happy if things just stay stable, that they can understand them. And somehow change is always something of insecurity. Now, we know a lot of innovators, I guess we belong to them. We embrace change. Yeah, we love it. Yeah, but that doesn't count for a lot of people. Do you see that as a general society problem, something where you see that's something you dig in with your consulting, that you help companies, help people embrace it more? What is your take on this challenge that you see in all these things popping up nowadays that people have to live with or cope with?
So our book is framed around an analogy of an octopus, and a lot of it derives from the octopus's very weird anatomy and biology, which is an incredibly apt way to think about AI. But a later chapter in it is titled An Emotional Creature. Because not only is an octopus clearly intriguing from an anatomical perspective, but it is emotional. And we have to take account of the emotional side of change. I was talking with a CIO of a very large company pretty recently, and she said, what's really hit me is in my organization, which was large, like 1,000 people, I have all of these people I've hired for their very specialized technical expertise. And yet just about all of them have to become change managers as well. So change is going to be all around us, not only in organizations, but as a society. And as people lose their jobs, as some people will, there will be even more insecurity around what the future holds. Now, the upside is also very large. And fundamentally, my book is an optimistic book about the upside of AI-driven change. But we have to take account of the dislocation people are going to feel in terms of AI doing some roles that they did previously. They're needing to level up a little bit in other things that AI can't do, which humans can do very well. So there's a change in their responsibilities in the way that they interact with people across an organization, because AI enables much more cross-functional collaboration, and at this persistent gnawing feeling of job insecurity, which already people are feeling, and it's really just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick question. Were you somehow inspired by the Netflix film My Octopus Teacher? Did you see that film?
I saw it after we had settled on the octopus analogy. And
okay.
Yeah, so the emotions came very clear, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The emotions there, and I think octopus are an adorable creature. And beyond that, but I was thinking actually about the color changing as well, the flexibility in form, fluidity in color. There's so many aspects of the octopus you could take and say, not just lovable as a nice animal, but they're also something that you could take over. So great idea, great analogy.
Here's actually how we start the book. The octopus is 300 million years old. It is 70 million years older than the dinosaurs. It survived for an incredibly long period of time, and it has almost no natural defenses. When A meteor struck the Earth 66 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs. It destroyed a vast array of species that had developed these very advanced defenses against the well-established threats that were out there. So there were these gigantic crustaceans called ammonites with these huge, thickly armored shells. Survive. Actually, the acid rain caused by the asteroid dissolved the shells, and their fortress became a prison. And that's a very apt analogy for a lot of organizations, companies that have developed these thick defenses, and then an asteroid comes that they're not prepared for, and they all die away. The octopus survives because it is adaptable. You can take an octopus from the Antarctic and plop it into the Caribbean, and within a few hours, it will be fine. So not only is the anatomy of the octopus very instructive to us, but its capability to be hyper adaptable is something we need in the AI age.
I think that's the same as what Charles Darwin once mentioned, that it's the species that is best adaptable to change will survive.
That's right.
It's not the strongest or the fittest. It's how well do you adapt to change. Yeah. And I completely agree, Steve, on the perspective that you have, is that people that work in, it doesn't really matter what job anymore, but specifically in tech jobs, you need to have a good understanding of what change management means, because people don't, there is so much change going on that some people just get lost in it. Then they need to be guided, and you need to make sure that they stay on board with whatever it is that you want to develop with the help, for instance, of AI. But this also applies for regular change, of course. I mean, even if you had major ERP transformation projects, how do you bring along the end users was one of the most critical adoption criteria out there. What's your experience on that particular change management topic when it comes to a disruptive technology like AI, which moves really, really fast?
So we advocate that companies think about ABC, 3 different tracks. AIFI, the present. So if you have things you're doing now where you can easily add AI and get a 5% efficiency gain, by all means do it. You don't need to overthink this. Just go ahead and do it. B is become great at experimentation. That does not mean having 900 pilots. It means being very intentional, thoughtful about how you experiment and what you get out of it. So what are you trying to learn? What are your hypotheses? What are your metrics? How are you going to measure them? You capture the learnings, and how will you disseminate them across the organization? Most organizations, particularly big organizations, really suck at experimentation. So they need to be good at that. Instead, they just run pell-mell into pilots and haven't gotten much out of it. C is create the future. And that is the focus of my book, AI and the Octopus Organization. That doesn't mean ripping and replacing everything all at once. The organization will die if you do that. But being selective about a handful of things where you can really, as HelloFresh did, think about the whole chain of causality throughout the organization, what has to change, and then make sure you change that well with AI that actually works and gets things right. But then also think about the human side of it. And, to the point of BPM, think about the processes, the human interactions that have, and the capabilities that have to change along with that to make that change really successful.
Yeah, we in the concept around process management, we always talked about also like ownership and expertise and what the model is. And a lot of companies, they start off more centralized. And I think one of the concepts in your book is also around distributed intelligence. And we see that there is, you need some coordination on a central perspective, from a central perspective, but we also proclaim that you really have to have like a hybrid setup where you have distributed ownership and expertise throughout the organization, which is per se something that is challenging. It's, and actually always reminds me of the time when a lot of industrial companies were creating like joint ventures and spin-offs to have some innovative like product designed. But the problem there is it wasn't part of the company. It was outsourced. Let's outsource our brain. Let's outsource our innovation. And that doesn't work. I don't think personally it can produce maybe a new company, but it's not embedding this thinking in the organization. So I think one of the big aspects that you're talking about is also something that we see as something essential for general excellence, optimization, but also like innovation, is by somehow getting the different teams, getting a distributed common understanding of how you can be, as you said, following the B, become good in piloting. Yeah, it's not just some pilots in the central station, but also not uncoordinated, everybody doing something, but you have to somehow have like an own process and an own like network and collaboration platform for people to dig into this. And I think I've seen companies doing it, but that are really good on that. But that is something that I think, as you say, I think a lot of companies really suck at that. And that's something where after the first stage of A, getting B done is something that just costs time as well, and really has to have a good, strong mandate from the management that this is essential to be able to sustain in the next couple of years.
Look, 100%. I alluded to the weird biology of an octopus. An octopus has 9 brains. Each arm has a brain in addition to the brain in the central head. Now, what that enables is very localized sensing and action. One arm and massively parallel action as well. Russell's arm can be opening up a clam, and Caspar's arm can be exploring a cave. And meanwhile, the central brain is thinking, how do I get away from that shark? So when the shark comes close enough, the central brain says, hey, Russell, Caspar, we're getting out of here. And you can coordinate all the arms all at once, which is essential. But generally, the octopus's arms can sort of do their own thing. It's a real natural advantage it has. It's a wonderful analogy of how AI can push decisions further down into an organization, enable that localized sensing and reaction, while also enabling that coordination amongst the arms too.
Yeah, that's a wonderful analogy. I worked in the manufacturing industry for close to 20 years. And we had this setup where we had an overarching, let's say that the central brain was called process advisory and services. And then each of our 8 business units actually had a little group called business information management, which is basically the local brain. And what we would do from the central brain is basically feed them with enough information that they could then translate into the specific localities of their own business unit. And that really worked well because they would, like you say, they would sense what's going on in their business unit. They would give us feedback on, hey, wait a minute, we're doing process standardization or process management. This works here, this doesn't. And we could take that into the central brain, so the central center of excellence, to process that and give them guidance. I love octopuses. I mean, they're not my favorite animal, but I'm warming up to them now.
So you're gonna, as long as you stop eating calamari and
I stay away from fish, most of it, because I'm allergic to shellfish, shrimp, and crabs, and those kind of things is makes me sick. So I try to stay away from that. So they should not worry if I'm in the water. They can live.
So look, AI enables us to do stuff that we've been talking about for 40 years, or at least more easily. Because, I mean, Caspar, you're doing it. It just was probably not so easy. So we've been talking about devolving authority and de-siloing organizations. This goes back way before my time to Tom Peters and In Search of Excellence.
Yes.
And yet it hasn't happened because it's been difficult, because data is unstructured and there's so much data that you don't know what to look for. But AI can bring structure to unstructured data, and it can make sure that the right data gets to the right people at the right times with action implications, or at least suggestions sometimes as well.
Then let me ask you this, because this is something I run into, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but certainly a weekly basis. I mean, AI thrives on input data, like many systems do. At the moment that input data is not accurate enough, or the quality is not high enough, the outcome of the AI will be, I would say, suboptimal. The question I have is, do you think that in the future, or maybe already, AI would also have that capability to say, I know I'm working off incomplete or not perfect data. I have options to actually enhance and reiteratively create a better quality of data. Because, I mean, if you put in crap, AI spits out crap. It's just creative other crap, I would say.
So I spent some time a couple of weeks ago with the chief scientist at IBM, and he told me he had this very interesting thought with 2 strands. First of all, he said, AI is better than a human being because with AI, you can measure its bias and systematically train the bias out of it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then he said AI is worse than a human being because human beings usually know when they are lying. And
Yeah,
AI does,
true.
right? I mean, at least
No,
generative
they don't.
AI is thinking probabilistically. It's not actually seeking the right answer. It doesn't know the right answer. It's looking for the most probable answer. And it does not know when it's hallucinating. Now, you can have another AI check the first AI and determine that. And that is definitely an approach to solving this issue. AI model in and of itself does not know when it's lying. So this is an issue that is getting addressed, but it is sort of a frontier of computer science to do that.
Yeah.
Eventually,
I guess that AI
we
engines
should be able to assess whether the quality of data seems appropriate to actually make a recommendation, or you have these checks built in. You have one model checking on the other model in a more seamless way than often occurs now.
Yeah,
But
and
today
I
that
think
is
that's
often
where
not done.
and I think this checks and balances. So currently, a lot of applications you say, the human being is still a factor. It has to validate, or it has to check for hallucinations. It has to check for the, let's say, crap in, crap out situation around the data. But more and more, I think you will have like a network of different checks and balances that each in itself would be very specialized, very well trained agents to say, I do a validation against hallucination. I do a double check here. I do a cross-check of the data before it's fed into some machine learning process. So I think the sophistication of building up like agent networks is working in exactly that direction. To create the single, let's say, trained generic whatever assistant is very much dependent on the way it's been configured. I would really say configured, which is the database that they've given it to access, and there can already be bias in the way that has been set up and down to the way that the prompt has been set. So there's just too many things that are dependent on the human being setting it up and the human being feeding it with prompts and the human being reading the prompt, that I think that to get to real professional solutions, you need more checks and balances, which will be more and more automated in themselves. So I can imagine there'll be own specialists that will just be bringing out data validation tools based on AI that are certified and, where you have specified outcome and not just a pilot or some whatever, I do it yourself kind of like solution. Yeah. I think the enterprise needs more robust results out of AI agents. And I think a lot of companies are working on having very specific solutions, agents in place that they can sell. And I think that's where a lot of the business has to go about, to think about what is it actually that you have on key data and knowledge that you can now provide as a service, maybe in this ecosystem of AI. And so I think for a lot of customers that held their, well, like you said, fresh, have their own data, they use it for their own course. I think more and more providers will think about, I have data, how can I provide it for others to use in a specific context? And that's Amazon's been doing it before for their traffic and data, for providing that data to other companies to dig into it. But I think the means of validating, providing, and using the data, big data, is really big. So I think that's a big market. So even more, the platforms will be trying to collect data to, based on that, offer more services to other companies.
There are so many possibilities. I agree with you. And this is why you need to prioritize. You need to choose maybe a half dozen big business questions that you're going to go after and you're really going to think creatively about. Not just optimize your 17-step process with an AI-ified 17-step process, but maybe it should be a 4-step process. And it's a fundamentally different 4 steps. And you can't do that across the entire business, right? So choose a half dozen that you go after and you do it well. And then you can move on and do another half dozen and so on. That's how an organization is really going to transform.
But I got a dilemma here, Steve, and I think it's going to be the final dilemma as I see the time's running out of the podcast. And
Caspar, your microphone's a bit quiet.
Is it?
Better now.
Let me try again.
Yeah.
Is this better?
It is.
All right, very good. So let me ask for a dilemma in that case, and it's the final one because we need to start going towards the end, unfortunately, already. I think we can talk for hours, Steve, to be honest. So on one hand, we have AI which does wonderful things. But we know that very often when we talk about change in organizations, it comes down to human behavior. I mean, if you want to change an organization, just putting some AI in place doesn't get the job done. You need to move the perception of people. You need to make them change somehow. On the other hand, we also know that the, let's say, abundant use of AI is impairing the critical thinking skills of people at the same time. How on earth are we going to reconcile both of these things happening?
I have kids in high school, and
me too.
See their friends using AI for everything, and they are doing themselves the biggest disservice possible because the AI age requires more critical thinking, not less. The people who get the most out of AI engage with it like a dance partner, not like, I'm dancing like John Travolta and here's Olivia Newton-John separate, but no, together. It's a tango.
It's a tango. I was going to say it's a tango.
That's right. You cannot tango on your own. You got to have a partner.
Yeah.
So you have to engage with it, not just in the prompts, but in the questioning and thinking, what does the AI not know? And, what might it know that I don't know? The big gains come from that tango, right? And so what happens, and there have been a lot of studies on this, AI makes mediocre workers decent, but there will be fewer of them.
Yeah.
It makes good people super amazing. And so we want to all be the super amazing. And that means we really have to engage with it, not let go of the critical thinking, but make it better. That's when you really get the full potential of what technology has unleashed here.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
agree. Russell, last question for you then.
Yeah. So at the beginning, Steve, you said that that a lot of the books that were sold by your colleague, that then the people read them and they said, okay, but how do we get this done? Yeah. And that was your motivation to found the consulting company. So in your book with the octopus, will people read it and afterwards have the same question? How the hell do I get it done? Does the book really give you some, the ABC was already great. I sense that we have an answer here, but just give us a hint. Would it help people to know how to start to get going, or do they need to read the book and then call you to get your consulting services?
I've never believed in holding back the keys. We say in the introduction, if you read one chapter, make sure it's the last one, which is titled Your Transformation Plan. And it is about a 5-phase process with many sub-steps about how do you get this done. And then there's an appendix about how do you scale enterprise AI. Now that comes at the end of the book because there's, a lot of groundwork that we lay, but if you don't make it happen, what's the point? It's a very interesting read, I'll promise you that, but you probably want to do something with it. So yes, that is the final chapter. It is essential reading as part of the book.
Fantastic.
All right. Brilliant. What's not so brilliant is that our time's actually up and we need to wrap this up, Steve. I cannot thank you enough. I really enjoyed the conversation. We hope you do too. Thank you very much for joining our podcast and being an active guest on the show. Russell, of course, to you, my thanks as well, as always, for making the very good questions that you have. And to our listeners, I would say, well, before I say that, one question, Steve, how can people reach you the easiest? Is that via LinkedIn or?
Yes, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn, Steve Wunker. You can look up the book. It's on Amazon. The website for the book is aiandtheoctopus.com. My company is New Markets with an S Advisors.
Yeah,
those are
we'll
probably
put the links in the show notes.
Best routes. And I am really responsive to things. If you want to send me a note on LinkedIn, I will get back to you.
Really good. And we'll put all the links into the show notes and to the description. But thank you very much for being on the show, Steve.
Steve, it was an honor having you on the show. It really was.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
So did we. And to our listeners, I want to say thank you very much for joining and speak to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.